It is very beautiful in a quite sad and poignant way, I found. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Molly, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the album The Greatest Mistake of My Life from the Welsh rock band Holding Absence. Now this is the second studio album from Holding Absence, and it's pretty new on the scene. It was released in April of this year. I'm also very new to this band in general. I'm not really familiar with any of their music prior to this album, so I'm kind of just getting into their music. If this album is any indication, they're fantastic. They're a great band with an awesome sound, and this album, frankly, really impressed me. I think the themes that it deals with loss and mourning and grief, it kind of blends all of those emotions with little glimmers of hope as well. So yeah, I figured I would just kind of go through track by track, give my little thoughts on The Greatest Mistake of My Life and why I like this album so much. It opens with the short little track Awake, which I think is almost like an extended part of their track Celebration Song. It's kind of like a beginning to that song, but Awake is kind of a nice little segue into the beginning of the album. It's very atmospheric. It's kind of a quiet, slow buildup of a song, and then with the vocals being whispered, I'm Alive. It's just a beautiful start to this album, and it flows right into track 2, Celebration Song. So like I said, it's almost like the introduction to Celebration Song. And then Celebration Song just starts off with I'm Alive being shouted this time. So instead of being whispered like it was on Awake, it's like fully just shouted out, and it is a celebration song of life. That's kind of how I interpreted it. This track just has a great hopeful tone to it, and like I said, this album blends that hopefulness with moments of melancholy and sadness really well. But this is one of the tracks where kind of that hopeful, more uplifting side of their music comes through on this album. And I just want to point out the vocals on this song are incredible. They're very clear, they're very strong, and paired with the instrumentals, it's just a fantastic track and a great opening song to this album. And then Celebration Song kind of just flows right into track 3, Curse Me With Your Kiss. This song kind of just swells and then becomes a little bit more minimal, and then it swells again. Like the chorus is really big. It has this expansive sound to it, but it's kind of a little bit more of a subdued track as well. I find overall across this album, Holding Absence does a really great job of making their music sound very big and expansive, but they use very minimal like instrumentals and everything. But I just thought it was really impressive how they could just make such this big sound with very, very minimal instrumentals. And then Curse Me With Your Kiss, again, we flow right into track 4, which is Afterlife. I think this was kind of like the biggest song on this album, like the most popular one, and for good reason. This is also one of my favorites on this album. It just has like a great explosive start to it. The first 3 tracks on this album are a little bit more reined in. I mean, they have that great expansive sound to them, but they're just a little bit more pulled back. Even Celebration Song, it's a little bit more reined in. And then Afterlife, you kind of get a little bit more of their just energetic, all-out, intense side, which I really like. I also love the piano on this track. They kind of incorporate that on a couple of tracks throughout this album, and it gives it a little bit of an acoustic instrumental side to their sound. Having kind of more organic instrumentals like the piano, it kind of gives it another side to their sound. Track 5, Drugs and Love, starts off very interesting with some female vocals that are just talking. They're slightly distorted a little bit, and then there's instrumentals being played alongside the talking. Kind of an interesting start, and then you just have these really explosive instrumentals come in. This is kind of the point in the album where we start to lose a little bit of that hopefulness that was at the beginning. So this track, they're starting to go into a little bit more depressive lyrics and topics, and it's kind of like the dark side of the album coming out a little bit. Lyrically, it's getting into saving me from my solitude and basically looking for a way to numb out through love and drugs. And emotionally, it's kind of almost like the low point of the album. So it kind of starts really hopeful, and then the middle chunk of this album kind of falls into the pits of despair. and then kind of toward the end we start to get a little bit more of that hopeful feeling. But this track, the lyrics are definitely a little bit more in that darker realm. And then the track ends kind of how it started, with the same female vocals just talking, and they're a little bit distorted. So it starts and ends the same way. But yeah, just a really interesting track. This one definitely stood out to me on this album. I really just enjoyed listening to it. And then Drugs and Love flows right into track 6, which is In Circles. This is definitely one of the standouts on this album for me. It is very beautiful in a quite sad and poignant way, I found. And again, this track continues on with the more melancholy side to this album, the darker, depressive sound. Lyrically, this track is actually really, really sad. Especially the line, "I was a fool to have thought I was worth more than a short life and a lifetime under dirt," something like that. That line really stood out to me. Like, it's just really, really sad when you analyze it. And like I said, I think this is kind of the track that's like the low point on this album emotionally. I think it's interesting to note too that In Circles is kind of like the halfway track on this album, and to me it's almost like the greatest mistake of my life. Like I said, it kind of starts hopeful, and then about halfway through we have tracks like Drugs and Love and In Circles, which are definitely thematically just darker and more depressive. And then toward the end of this album, it kind of starts to get a little hopeful again. It's almost like the album is cyclical in a way of human emotion. That's kind of how I interpreted it. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but it's almost like the track In Circles. It's talking about like the cycle of healing. Track 7, Nomoreroses, spelled all one word. This one really stood out to me. I like how different this track is. The beginning, we start off with just such intensity. I love the start of this track. And then later on, about halfway through, there's kind of almost a more groovy sound that this track takes on. Yeah, vocally, it's just one that really stood out to me. There's a lot of different sounds going on. I just loved how they changed the vibe of it up a little bit. They changed the type of singing that they do up, and it just meshes a bunch of different sounds. And yeah, it was just a really interesting track. Track 8, Beyond Belief. This is, like I said, kind of when that more hopeful sound starts to be reintroduced to this album. This track is very bright and clear. Again, it embraces that more expansive sound. It's kind of reminiscent of just a early morning, like a clear, crisp day. The sun is rising. That's almost what it sounds like. That's kind of what I picture when I hear this song. It's just a very hopeful sounding, like the future is gonna be okay. That's just the impression this song left me. Track 9 is Die Alone in Your Lover's Arms. This one, again, has those female vocals at the start of it. And then the instrumentals come in and just bring so much energy to this track. And then the actual singing female vocals on the second verse of this track really took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting it. I really like the dynamic of the two vocalists. It kind of just changed it up a little bit, and it made for an interesting duet, like two people singing the same words to each other. Track 10 is Phantoms, kind of just a little interlude track, you could call it. Very relaxing to listen to. I actually really like this one. Very atmospheric and calming. It kind of just puts you in a trance. And again, you have just that female voice talking, and then the instrumentals are played over it, and it kind of provides a nice little prelude to the next track, which it flows right into, which is Mourning Song. This is possibly my favorite track on this album. It's right up there, I think, with Afterlife and In Circles. Those are probably my top 3. But yeah, track 11, Mourning Song, is just absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. This track is fantastic. It's 7 minutes long, and whenever I listen to it, I swear it's maybe 4 minutes. I absolutely love the violin on this one. Again, they incorporate some of those more classical instruments into their sound. And the chorus, it's almost just like a release of energy. It's so big, and again, with the expansive sound. Lyrically, this track is not necessarily the most hopeful song, but it sounds hopeful, and they kind of bring those tones back with this track. But it's just a gorgeous song, and definitely, for sure, one of the standouts on this entire album for me. And then track 12 is the title track, The Greatest Mistake of My Life. This is also the last track on the album, and it's kind of like a little outro. It's pretty short. It's just over a minute long. It kind of sounds almost like an old-fashioned radio with like the static and the crackling sound effects going on. If I'm being honest, I think that Mourning Song is a great closing track to this album. I don't necessarily know if this last title track is necessary, but it doesn't take anything away from the album either. I'm kind of neutral on it. But yeah, it kind of just provides an interesting little ending to this album just to close things out and kind of bring things to a close on what I think is frankly one of 2021's best albums so far. So yeah, there you have it. There's my little review of The Greatest Mistake of My Life, the second studio album from Holding Absence. I think it's a great album. If you haven't heard it, I would highly, highly recommend checking it out. It has some great tracks on it. The emotional delivery of this album is phenomenal. It's amazing. They blend so many different feelings and thoughts and emotions into one album, and sonically it flows so well. And then from a technical standpoint, Holding Absence is incredibly talented as well. Their lead vocalist, all of their instrumentals are so well done. But yeah, definitely down in the comments let me know if you've heard this album and if you have, what your favorite song is off of it. But as usual, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned and I will see you in the next video.